Okay, cool. So my name is Andrew. I'm a 3D animator here in Vancouver, mostly working in visual effects. I work at Weta Fx right now, but I've worked kind of all over the place in Vancouver. So probably about a dozen studios at this point. So what we're going to get started with is an overview, just kind of talking about what we're going to get into over the next probably 30-45 minutes. I doubt it'll be that much longer. I'll keep the recording short. So first thing we'll do, introduce myself, talk a little bit about where I've worked and some of the studios and projects that I've been on. Next thing we're going to do is talk about animation demo reels and why they're so important. We'll have a look at mine, but mostly we'll just discuss kind of what they are and what they're for. I'll get into some work history. And we will, when you're screen sharing, it is really annoying to add people. All right, admit. Okay. So yeah, basically we are going to go over a little bit of work history and then get into all the different kind of types of animation companies who you can be working for, the kind of studios that'll hire you, and the kind of studios that you will actually be producing content for, because they are generally two different types of studios. Once we're done with that, we'll get into the kind of tools that 3D animators are using. There's one kind of main industry standard tool called Maya that we'll get into. And then we'll talk about the visual effects and 3D animation pipeline, because that kind of really expands on the kind of jobs that are available. A lot of people know about 3D animators, 3D modelers, but that's just kind of a fraction of the people who are actually working at a 3D animation or visual effects company. There's way more out there that you might actually end up being more interested in than just kind of the major ones that everyone's heard of and everyone's seen on, like Pixar behind the scenes. Once we're through with kind of the large amount of jobs and departments that are available and kind of working in a studio, we are going to talk about the 12 principles of animation, kind of refocus back on 3D animation, and give a little Autodesk Maya demonstration, just so you can get a bit of a sense of what the day-to-day as an animator looks like and the kind of things that you'd be doing as an animator. So let's get right into it. So introduce myself. My name is Andrew McCartney. As I said, I've been working as a 3D animator for about a decade, maybe about 11 years at this point. I went to school here in Vancouver a while ago, in about 2010. And since then, I've just been working as a 3D animator basically the entire time. I've done a little bit of previs as well, but that was just like one off. For the most part, it's just been 3D animation the whole time. So these are some of the projects that I've worked on over the past decade. I've done 3 different Spider-Man movies. That's mostly responsible for all the gray hairs you'll see on the side of my head. A Jurassic Park movie, a Pokemon movie, one of the John Wicks, a Game of Thrones, 2 different video games, Mortal Kombat, and I don't know if it's on here. Looks like not, but a Final Fantasy as well. And then a bunch of Marvel movies, bunch of TV shows, all that sort of stuff. When you're working in visual effects, especially, you're hopping from project to project fairly quickly. Like you might spend anywhere from like 3 months to a year on one project. Compare that to video games, where you're going to be on something potentially for like 3 or 4 years at a time. Or TV shows where you're generally on one for a year, because that's about how long it takes to make a season of television. Aside from those, the big thing that you have to have if you're going to be working in the CG industry, which is the easiest way to kind of describe 3D animation, feature films, television shows, visual effects, it's just the CG industry, is what's called a demo reel. Nobody in the industry really cares about where you went to school, what your educational history is, who you are, all those sorts of things that like a normal job might care about. All they really care about is what your demo reel looks like. So as a student, you would create a couple of shots, maybe something in the range of like 35 to 45 seconds long, stitch them together into a demo reel. And it's just kind of showing anyone who's recruiting for a job what you can do. So that's essentially what a demo reel is. It's your calling card, it's your resume, it is everything that is going to get you a job, all packaged together into one thing, which means it's quite important. And we have several terms dedicated just to refining your demo reel, because end of the day, as nice as all of your assignments are at school, really the demo reel is the thing that's going to get you your job. Nobody really reads resumes in 3D animation. It's all just watching this demo reel. So this is mine. You can see it's a little bit longer than a student demo reel would be. Student demo reel, they're looking at just over half a minute. This one's 1 minute and 2 seconds, but that's a decade of work kind of condensed into one. Let me just make sure that I'm sharing audio. I probably am. Share sound? I wasn't. Okay, that would have been really boring. Cool. So we're going to give this a watch. All right, so that is my demo reel. And most demo reels look like that. Whether you're a 3D animator, 3D modeler, texture artist, what have you, comp artists, it's usually just shots taken from the movies or the TV shows that you've worked on, edited together, just highlighting the best work you've done. It's not necessarily like the coolest shots that I've ever worked on, but it's usually the ones that highlight something about animation that I can do, whether it's like, oh, it's a nice creature shot, it's good body mechanics or something like that. And each shot should really have a purpose. It's not just kind of like, oh, I did 20 shots, I'll stitch them together. You want to think, is this the best iteration of what I've done? So that you're not wasting someone's time and you are also not leaving something out. You've got a skill that you should be showing and you're not. So yeah, really quickly, since we got a couple extra people here, I'm going to jump backwards. Sorry to anyone who's been here the entire time, but I'm going to jump backwards and just give a quick overview again over what we're going to be looking at today. So we've already gone through my introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm a 3D animation instructor here at KPU. I work at Weta Fx, which you probably know from like Avatar. What else have they worked on? Lord of the Rings, Kingdom of or Planet of the Apes, all those sorts of things. Avengers Endgame, that sort of stuff. Talked about some of the places I've worked, some of the, or actually we haven't yet, talked about some of the projects I've worked on, and we just watched my demo reel, which is really, really the kind of calling card for animators. So moving forward, what we're going to talk about now is the places that animators actually work at, because a lot of people think that you're going to be working for the people that actually distribute the content that you work on. Like, let's say you're working on a Netflix show, people think, oh, I'll be working for Netflix. Generally not the case. Netflix will hire a production company that will actually produce the content, and usually it's that production company that ends up hiring like a visual effects studio or an animation studio to work on what they're working on. The big sort of exceptions to this are the largest of the large 3D animation studios, things like Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, who are actually creating and to some extent distributing their own work. But what you end up with is these kind of big categories of studios that work on very, very different things. So everybody kind of knows of your feature animation studios, right? I already mentioned a couple of them: Disney Animation Studios, Pixar, DreamWorks, Sony Pictures Imageworks. They're making the big things that you're seeing, making $1 billion in movie theaters. You probably watched a couple of them yourself in the past year or so. Everybody knows these ones. and everybody knows their work. Next up is a little bit more niche, is the visual effects studios. These guys tend to be working on still fairly major shows, but it's a little bit more discreet. It's a little bit harder to see what they've actually done, because generally speaking, there's live action actors also there, also visible. So sometimes their work is just a little bit harder to see. So you've got studios, especially in some place like Vancouver, where you've got DNEG, which is kind of one of the larger ones in Vancouver right now. They always win the visual effects Oscar all the time. You probably saw their work in Dune if you've seen that. Place like Industrial Light and Magic, which is really, really famous for Star Wars movies. Weta Fx, so where I work right now. And then smaller visual effects studios like Image Engine. I've got a little asterisk next to the name of the studio if I've worked there. So once we get to the Q&A, if you've got a question about one of those, definitely just let me know. So beyond visual effects and feature animation studios, there are the game studios, which actually employ a lot of 3D artists because they've got so much stuff to do. If you think about, a narrative or RPG game, there's so many cutscenes, so many, characters that you need to have run cycles, walk cycles, actions that need to happen, that they generally employ just towards 3D artists. So you can think of Nintendo, Activision, Electronic Arts, Square Enix, whatever your favorite game is, Naughty Dog, they were made by somebody, and that studio is likely still in existence if it was made recently. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And beyond that, you've got your kind of large streaming or cable television networks, things like Netflix, Nickelodeon, Disney Plus, HBO. And these guys aren't going to hire you directly, but they're going to hire either a visual effects studio, feature animation studio, or a smaller TV animation studio to do the work for them. And they will essentially be your client when you're working. Beyond that, there's actually a couple smaller options for you working freelance. Now, whether this is working freelance just on your own or working with like a small group of friends to complete projects, you've got things like commercials, you've got theme park rides, both the rides themselves or kind of ads for them or stuff like that. You've got museums are actually surprisingly large. I think I've worked on 2 different museum kind of installations. And then there's stuff for like both medical and architectural applications, and probably some other stuff, the government work that I'm forgetting. But yeah, you can see there's quite a large array of different studios or applications that you could actually end up animating on. It's mostly up to you where you end up. If you really, really want to work in, for instance, like video games, well, it might not be your first job, because I generally suggest you take whatever option you can right when you graduate. Just take anything. Doesn't matter if it's like, oh, it's a weird architectural firm that wants me to model stuff. Like, take it, whatever. It gets actual real work on your reel before any of the other stuff. But you can generally kind of lean yourself into whatever industry or part of the industry you want to go into. Just can take a couple months. So those are kind of the people that you will likely end up working for. And let's talk a little bit about what the actual studios do. If you've ever watched the behind the scenes of, say, a Pixar, Disney, Sony, ImageWorks movie, you kind of generally have an idea of how 3D animation works. It's essentially a video game that just gets rendered. It's a little slower than a video game, but that's how it works. Visual effects is a little bit different in that sometimes you actually have real life photography that someone has shot with a camera, and then you make a CG camera that essentially does the same motion so that you can stick 3D elements into that world, overlay them, and it looks like the 3D element exists in real life, which is kind of magical when you see it happen. You go from having these like just weird, awkwardly placed 3D objects to something that really feels like it's like sticking to the ground, which is really, really cool. So we're going to watch this video from Image Engine about the John Wick bike chase scene that I worked on a while back. So this first shot is actually not someone with a camera taking these cameras. This is just a series of HDRI images that are stitched together into like half a globe. And then I just grabbed the camera and did a little pan across it so that it looks like there were motorcycle riders riding across. And then obviously you add the bridge clothesline and the motorcycle riders themselves. So you can see those guys are full CG along with John Wick himself. And then they've just got the arch leading to the building. This is actually pretty much plate for the most part, except for the rider that comes up on the very end of the shot here on the right. This guy becomes fully CG just for the very end, just so it cuts well with the next shot. So you can see here, this is a great example of what a plate looks like, where you got some things in the scene that look like totally real, like, oh my god, he's actually like a ninja on a bike. And then you got like dudes in the background covered in green pushing these fake bikes around. So what we were doing, adding in the bottoms of all these bikes, adding in the bikes in the background. Anytime somebody got stabbed, you do like a CG sword sticking out of them, that sort of stuff in there. And then just doing some clever little tricks here and there to make sure the shots kind of blend together. So like here to here, this is actually CG bike, CG camera move, connecting two separate shots that were probably shot days apart from each other. But if you do a decent enough job of like your one camera ends here and you've got another camera here, you can just kind of blend the CG cameras together so they look okay, they look decent. And add in your CG elements. Ta-da! Everybody feels like they saw a ninja really flip and crash his little motorcycle. Sometimes you're just taking over little tiny parts of a shot, like in the move coming up here, John Wick hacks this guy's arm off, and the stunt actor obviously has a real arm that we just kind of replaced in CG so that it could get sliced off and then get stuck in the back of his wheel. Now, obviously, you take some liberties. For instance, if you really were to stick something in the back of a motorcycle's back tire, nothing would happen. It would just slow down. The front tire would probably be a little dicey, but the back tire, you're not going to get a flip like this. But it's way more interesting if somebody actually flips into another bike behind them. So that's what we kind of end up with there, getting kind of our CG bikes here, CG characters. And you can kind of see what this looks like from any other view. Pretty barren, not a lot happening, but because we're only looking at it from one specific angle, it ends up looking all right. Something like this one, I don't think they show it in the breakdown here, but this isn't actually Keanu Reeves. This is a stunt actor. We're just putting Keanu Reeves' face on that there. This is one of the only fully CG shots, I think, in this. And then we're back to Keanu Reeves in a green screen room, beating up stunt guys. And then this is one of the few real bike crashes in the movie. And I really hate it. I think the bike looks super light, but that's just like a personal pet peeve. So you can see here, we're adding Keanu's face and not really much else. We take the training wheels off the bike. There's obviously nobody riding it, but that's it. And that's kind of how that sequence worked. It was about 4,000 frames, really long sequence. Okay, I think at the end of the day, I think you could think that those were actually bikes if you were to watch it just one time, and you didn't have someone kind of over your shoulder telling you what's going on. Now, as far as 3D animation goes, there has been animation going on for well over a century, starting well before even like Disney was started. But Disney is really where the art form came together, and the first couple big highly talented animators that ever worked at Disney came up with a series of 12 principles that have kind of since guided everyone who's learning 3D animation. We're going to watch a quick video about these 12 principles. I might stop here and there just to kind of explain or disagree with the video here or there, but yeah, let's get started.
The following has been paraphrased from The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. Squash and stretch. This action gives the illusion of weight and volume to a character as it moves. Anticipation. Prepares the audience for a major action the character is about to perform. Each major action is preceded with specific moves that anticipate for the audience what is about to happen. Staging. It's the presentation of an idea so that it is clear. Straight ahead and pose to pose. Pose to pose is charted with key drawings done at intervals throughout the scene. straight-ahead animation starts at the first drawing and works drawing to the end of a scene. Follow through and overlapping. When the main body of the character stops, all other parts continue to catch up to the main mass. Nothing stops all at once. Slow in and slow out. As the action starts, we have more drawings near the starting pose, one or two in the middle, and more drawings near the next pose. Fewer drawings make the action faster, and more drawings make the action slower. Arcs. All actions, with few exceptions, follow an arc or slightly circular path. Arcs give animation a more natural action and better flow. Secondary action. It's an additional action in the scene used as a supplement of the main one in order to reinforce it and add more dimension. Timing. More drawings between poses slow and smooth the action. Fewer drawings make the action faster and crisper. Timing maintains the appearance of an object abiding by the laws of physics. Exaggeration. Remain true to reality, just presenting it in a wild or more extreme form. Solid drawings. It means taking into account forms in three-dimensional space, giving them volume and weight. Appeal. It's a quality of charm, able to please the viewer's eyes. It's the charisma of the action.
Alrighty, so now those 12 principles as they exist aren't really the be-all end-all of animation. They're things that you need to be able to do, and if you're missing them, it's likely that your animation is going to feel like it's lacking. To me, they're kind of like the grammar of animation. They're things that you need to incorporate, the rules that you need to follow generally. But just because your shot has all those things, just because you've written a book and it has good grammar, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good book. It's kind of a requirement for people to be able to read it, but it's not anything that you can be like, hey guys, look at me, I've fully mastered my grammar, hire me as a writer. Like, that's not quite going to get you all the way there. But they are very, very important. So it's something that we really harp on in the first kind of term two type of stuff, just to make sure that everyone has those skills, those capabilities to start creating animation that reads well to an audience, and that kind of you can start directing in interesting and fun ways. Another thing I want to talk about here is the animation and visual effects pipeline, because this really expands on the kind of jobs that you might be able to think about taking up one day, or kind of that you might want to consider looking into a little bit more. So this looks like a lot of stuff, right? There's quite a lot of little departments here. And I'm just going to go through these and discuss kind of where their place is in the general making of a movie. I'm actually going to start here at the end, just so you get an idea of where we're going. The last department is actually going to be compositing. Compositing puts all the pieces together into a flat 2D image, and that's what gets sent to the client, who then edits it into the movie. So that's where everything is going if you're kind of trying to figure out where this whole thing goes. But with that as the end, we're going to start with pre-production here on the left side. Now, research and development is really, really important. However, I would say that most research and development jobs are significantly more technical. They're mostly like pretty technical coding. So if you know someone who graduated and has their PhD in computer science, yes, that's a great job. But generally speaking, most like animators, modelers, texture artists, whatever, are not going to go into research and development, because that's like deciding how light penetrates skin to get realistic looking skin. Beyond research and development, which is just kind of deciding, okay, how are we technically going to accomplish our task? You're going to start pretty much any large sequence or job or project with a series of tests, just to confirm that you can actually do this thing, and kind of highlight some of the problems that you might run into. So nearly every single studio will have one or two artists just working together in concert to make little tiny snippets or slices of what the final thing is going to kind of look like. Even if they're not like real shots in the movie, there'll be something close enough that it'll highlight to them any problems that you might have with your pipeline, with assets not holding up, with, oh, it turns out animating this thing is really, really hard. Can we figure out a way to simulate it or something like that? So doing just tests early on, really, really, really important. and something that you kind of want to be doing in your own life if you're tackling large projects. Don't just start the really hard, really big project and go, cool, I'm just going to bang this out and finish the whole thing. It's a lot easier to do a small chunk of it to completion and figure, okay, how did this go? Are there any things that I need to learn that are going to save me a lot of time? Or is there things that I actually don't need to really do because it ended up not being a factor in my little test? So they can save you a ton of time in the long run. Next, we have a big one, 3D modeling. These are actually creating and sculpting the actual characters. If I'm going to be a CG asset, I need skin, I need hair, I need clothes, I need nails, eyeballs, all those sort of things that you want a person who looks like a person to have. Now, within modeling, within kind of the creatures or people, you've got environments, people, you've got actually grooming hair, you've got a whole set of things that can be kind of associated with what you might consider modeling. So it's a really, really big department. You can kind of, usually either start with props, you can start with environments. It's very rare that you will be hired right out of school and someone's going to say, here, model Thanos, because that's a really big character and it's usually going to a senior. So right out of school, if you're kind of thinking about becoming a modeler, start thinking, smaller parts of the whole environment. So small environment, couple prompts, maybe do a character just to show you can do it, but don't do 3 of the same style of character because you're just showing you can do characters and they're not going to hire you to do characters. It's nice to know that you are interested in characters. It's nice to know that you have the skills to do them, but they're going to start you off with smaller props or environments or what have you. Below modeling, we've got previs, storyboard, concept art. Again, previs stands for pre-visualization, which is something that is done mostly for the benefit of the studio and the director, because it's really hard for them to kind of imagine what the movie is going to look like, especially if the director doesn't have a lot of CG experience. So you make kind of a mock-up of your sequence with really rough camera, really rough animation, really rough everything. And you say, here's what it's going to look like. Trust us and give us a lot of money and we'll make it look really pretty. Generally speaking, not something that you need to do for your own projects. If you're a student, you don't need to like previs out your whole reel. You can if you want to. If you want to be a previs artist, it's definitely worthwhile. But for you, some quick storyboards or thumbnails is more than good. Now, storyboards are just drawings of what the camera is going to eventually look like so that you can kind of feel out the story for yourself a little bit better. Storyboard artists are certainly a thing. It's quite a fun job. You're just kind of working one-on-one with the director, figuring out how a sequence is going to look. That said, it's a lot of drawing skills. So if drawing is not something you are interested in, do not become a storyboard artist. The other one that a lot of people fixate on is concept art. I'll be honest, concept art is incredibly hard to get into. It can be fun. A lot of people really enjoy it, but it is a department where you are kind of competing with people who've been drawing their entire lives and are very, very good at it. Compare that to 3D animation, where everyone starts learning 3D animation in 3D animation school. So everyone's kind of starting from the same level. Compare that to concept art, where you're battling against somebody who's been drawing since they were 3 and is like world class, and that's a junior. So just something to keep in mind. During production, it's not something that we really deal with a lot of at KPU. Certainly in the visual effects side, there is some information gathering, like the sort of stuff you'll need, info about your camera, info about the amount of light that's in the scene, that sort of stuff does kind of get discussed. But by and large, you're more doing importing that information from the people on set that are taking it. Certainly if you rise up high enough, you'll become like a visual effects supervisor and you can be on set a lot, but by and large, we're kind of dealing more with the post-production side. So in post-production, once a shot has been decided on, if they say, hey, we're going to make this shot happen, whether it's coming out of tracking and match move, or you've got some sort of layout department that is going to make a full CG camera for you, or the animator himself or herself is going to just make that camera themselves, you're going to end up one way or another with a CG camera, and you're going to end up with some sort of asset, whether it's like a dragon flying through it, or you've just got like a can of soda pop that somebody's tossing off a car. Like it can really vary in what you're actually doing. But at the end of the day, you are going to have texture artists who are going to make sure that whatever was modeled back in pre-production ends up looking nice, looking like it fits in with the world, whether it's stylized, whether it's realistic. You've got nice textures on that 3D object that was created way back in the day. You might need a rigging artist, someone to say, hey, our dragon's going to flap, or our pop can is going to have a little pop top that can move. It can vary that large in itself. You've got people like our look development, which is surprisingly different from texturing. So the texture artist might make, the logo on the pop can, but the look development artist is going to say, hey, it's raining. This should be shiny and wet. So they're going to adjust the shaders to make this look like it should be looking the whole time. Once it's through texturing, rigging, look development, it's going to get passed off to the animation department or the motion department, depending on the studio that you're at. And, whether, again, it's dragon flapping or a pop can soaring through the air, getting tossed away from a vehicle, they're just making sure that this thing looks like it should be moving, or it looks like what it should be moving like. So you should watch it and think, oh yeah, that's a pop can, or that's a dragon, not, oh, that dragon looks kind of funky, or, oh, that never seen a pop can move like that. That shouldn't be your thought. Once animation is approved, everyone likes it, the studio likes it, director likes it, it goes to lighting and rendering or gets passed to effects. If you've got like a character with lots of clothes on, lots of long dangly hair, that sort of stuff, effects is going to spend a fairly long time kind of building those up so that your character's clothes look like real clothes, so that their hair looks like it drags like hair. If the dragon is breathing fire, looks like the fire is nice. And then that all gets kind of sent to lighting so that they can build all of the kind of fake lights that will make this thing look like it's real. So if I was trying to light myself and I had like this room was shot behind me, but I had no idea what the CG character was going to look like, I would hopefully get a chrome ball shot in the actual location, which would tell me, okay, this is what the rest of this room looks like, and we can use that to generate image-based lighting. If not, you would have to look at the shadows on the wall and say, okay, we've got one strong key light coming from this side. We've got some fill, but not that much on this side, and really not much of a rim light that I can see, but you'd probably put one in there just to cover your bases. And you get your kind of three major lights, fill, key that's the strongest, and then something just to fill out anything if I turn too far. So lighting, actually a really, really fun department that a lot of people don't think of when they're thinking of like, oh, I want to be a CG artist. But if you like photography, it's something that really connects quite closely with that. From there, there's some kind of tangent departments that are related to those. You've got something called rotoscoping, which is, let's say we don't shoot on a green screen, but I want to either remove something, paint something out, or I want a character to be like shot on a different background than they actually were shot without using the green screen. You actually have to cut them out frame by frame so that you can kind of swap them out somewhere else in the compositing stage. Bit of a pain in the butt, but it's definitely where a lot of visual effects artists get their first shot at a studio job. The other one is digital matte painting. Whenever you see these like big cinematic 3D environments that are like a camera blows through, you're watching Avatar or something like that, you think, oh, wow, they actually modeled all of this. This is crazy. It looks so cool. They didn't actually model all of it. A lot of it is just paintings. It's just digital paintings that someone's making in the background because they're like, modeling that would be a huge pain in the butt. Nobody's actually, circling the camera 360 degrees around this giant castle. We're just going to paint it and save ourselves a couple of months of work. So a lot more stuff than you expect in visual effects is just painted because it's so much easier. So digital matte painting gets used quite a lot. And then I think that's most of everybody. All of that stuff gets assembled by the compositor. Now, the interesting thing about compositors is that they're almost always just working in 2D, essentially just Photoshop with multiple frames over it. If you've ever worked in After Effects, basically the same thing, just kind of instead of working in layers, you're working in nodes, which is just a little bit more powerful. So those are kind of the general, at long last, general artist side jobs and departments. There are still other jobs, especially related to production. So All of these different departments have to work together. All of these different tasks have to finish in roughly the right order. And so you need a lot of people talking to each other all the time, updating like, oh, hey, this task is going to take a couple more days, or, oh, we actually need this asset a little bit earlier if we're going to get far enough into this. And that's what production is doing, making sure that everybody's kind of running in the right direction to get the job done. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Maya. Autodesk Maya is really the industry standard. If you're starting a job in 3D, you're going to be working in Autodesk Maya. There are other programs out there, but if a studio is using them, they're expecting you to know Maya, and they will train you on the other software. So even if it's an in-house thing, even if it's completely different Cinema 4D or Max or something like that, they're still going to expect you to know Maya and expect to have to train you to use whatever their software is. So learning anything other than Maya is definitely possible, is definitely a thing that's not going to hurt you in any way. It's nice to expand your tool set, but it's not really necessary because everyone's using Maya right now. Is that going to be the case? Hopefully not, because Maya is not really the greatest, software ever made, but it is what everyone expects you to know. Yeah, hopefully one day we can get rid of it, because it kind of is crummy. But this is Autodesk Maya. This is a student version that you would be working with if you go to KPU. You can kind of see if I create something like a cube here, this is basically like a really lame video game, right? You can move your camera around, you've got 3D objects. Think of it like a really, really, really basic sandbox that can do a lot of things. If you think of the number of things that you can do in like Photoshop or After Effects, those programs that you're probably familiar with, this can just do a lot more because it's in 3D. That said, it doesn't do much for you. Now, in Maya, you've got your kind of major things that you can do with an object. So I've created this cube here. I can translate it around. I can move it in space, which is obviously a really big one if you're going to be a 3D animator. I can rotate it, which is really, really key here. So I can actually kind of spin it around any which way I want. I can focus on what's called these axes, rotating. And then the other one is scaling. I can make things bigger or smaller. This one is actually probably the least used out of these in animation, at least. It's not to say you don't use it, but it's probably translation and rotation are the big ones. So one of the first things you're ever going to do as an animator is actually called the bouncing ball exercise. And I wanted to go through one of these guys with you, just so you get a sense of what 3D animators are doing. So I've got my ball here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move it up so it's actually kind of on the ground and not resting halfway through it. But I don't want my ball to reset to this height. So I'm just going to zero out my translations, which is just a way of saying, hey, this is home for you now. Home is sitting on the ground. Now I could do this all from a perspective view like I've got it here, but that's actually going to be using an extra level of this program that I don't need. If I'm doing a ball bouncing in space, bonk, 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 I really don't care about the depth of this object. I just want to see it in X and Y. If you guys think back to like a math class that you guys had sometime in high school, you probably used some sort of graphing software or a graphing calculator, or you just drew out little squares in your notebooks or something like that to make Cartesian maps. Well, essentially, that's what a 3D program is doing. We've just added depth. So if you think back to those math classes, you've got translate Y, which is up and down. You've got translate X, side to side. And all we're doing here is adding Z. Now, if you look at my channel box here, which is just kind of a way of keeping track of all these different values, my sphere is at 0, 0, 0, 0. It's at home base, right? It's where it starts the process off. If I move it up, you can see the only thing that changes is translate Y. If I move it to the side, the only thing that changes is translate X. I mean, if I do decide to do something in depth, you can see that's what I end up with. Now you can imagine that keeping track of these while something is moving is going to be a huge pain in the butt, because I've got 6 different channels with values that are going to be constantly changing while this thing is moving. huge pain in the butt even to imagine it with like one single object doing one thing. If you've got a really complicated character with dozens, perhaps hundreds of different parts to them, like limbs, this can be really, really overwhelming. So luckily, there is a tool for animators called the graph editor, which is a bit of a pain to think about, but it's really the most used tool for animators. So what I can do here is I can start to actually animate this object by setting what's called keyframes. Now, a keyframe is essentially a way of telling my object or telling Maya that I want you to be here at this time. So on frame 1, which is the first frame of my scene, I'm going to keyframe my sphere. So I'm going to, if you wanted to know the hotkey, hit S, but it's not super necessary that you know the hotkeys. And I say I want this to fly into the sky. I'm going to go 24 frames later, and I'm going to say, hey, jump into the sky for me, sphere. And since I set that first keyframe, it's going to remember, hey, we started at the ground, 24 frames later, we're up here. Now, why did I pick 24 frames later? Well, that in 3D animation is a second. If you think of like frame rates from video games that you may have played, and you're like, oh, this is looking really choppy. It's because it's got a low frame rate. Animation is done at a consistent frame rate, whether it is feature animated films or visual effects. If it's for movies, it's at 24 frames per second. If it's for film, it's for 24 frames per second. If it's for video games, it's actually done at 30 frames per second in most cases. But by and large, 24 is the standard that most people are working with. If you ever have to work in a different frame rate, it's actually not the end of the world. You just kind of multiply things in your head to be a little bit slower. So if we look at our graph editor, you can see I've got this line that kind of drags upward, and translate Y is the easiest part of a graph editor to understand. I go halfway through my move, so my ball is halfway up here, and I grab one of the ends of my kind of sloping curve here. I can move the end up. You can see even halfway up, my ball starts to rise. If I drag it down, it starts to lower. So this graph editor line or curve is just saying, hey, how high is this thing going? Is how high this curve in Translate Y is going to go. Now, Translate Y, by far the easiest one to understand, because the higher this curve goes, the higher my ball goes. Now, if I zero this out and we look instead at something like Translate X, which is our side to side, if I drag this guy up in Translate X, you can see we get the same kind of curve in our graph editor, but instead of going up when I drag this higher, it goes further to the right. Or if I make it this negative, it goes further to the left. Easiest way to see this is actually not from our perspective view here, but is instead from a front view, so that we're kind of completely ignoring the depth, and we're just looking at this perfectly from the front and saying, hey, let's just look at X and Y. Now, as an animator, as fun as it is to be playing with Y and X independently, much more fun to work with these together as one kind of cohesive unit. So what I like to do to show people kind of the power of the graph editor is to do a quick diagonal line on this guy here. So let's do 25 and 51, just to make the math easier. So I've got a diagonal line that this guy is going through. Just to show this even easier, I am going to throw on what's called a motion path, just so we can see the path that this guy is taking kind of highlighted for us really easily. Now, if I grab these curves and I say, hey, let's loop these forever, just so that we get a repeating cycle from this guy. We go up and down and up and down. And even though I don't have keyframes after this, it's just going to keep doing this little move. While it's nice to have something that's moving in a straight line, in animation, you remember those 12 principles? One of them was arcs, that we almost never want to be traveling in a perfectly straight line, because that's not how organic things tend to move. If I think of how my elbow rotates my wrist, it doesn't move it in perfectly straight lines unless I'm being really, really careful with it. It'll move it in little arcs, right? It moves it in kind of circular paths, because our body is made up of joints, and those are just essentially big objects that rotate from a pivot. So we want something like that most of the time. Now, the easiest way to do this is actually just to offset stuff, so that rather than hitting my keyframes all together, we're going to hit it one by one by one. So if I start to pull this apart, you can kind of see what's happening with my motion path. It starts really, really boring, perfectly straight line. And then as I offset things, we start to get a more circular arc. And if I do this fully offset, we can get a bit of a circle here. And then that's essentially how you make something moving in a circle. If you ever needed that. Now, obviously in animation, you're rarely just sending something in a perfect circle, but if you ever had to have, a character doing a weight shift, they were kind of settling after a move and you wanted their center of gravity or their hips to do something circular, you just set your keyframes and then offset them so that it looks nice and organic. So when you're being an animator, it's not just thinking like, where is my object sitting, left or right, up or down, forward or back? It's where is it moving in time? So you're kind of engineering the timing of your object hitting things at different moments. So that's the kind of basics of Maya. I did want to just bring up a shot that I did a while back, just so we can get a sense of what a more complicated motion might be. So this is a biped character. This is a character with 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, doing just kind of a parkour climb. So if I play this once for you, you get this guy who hops up and just kind of starts to run along this little ledge. Now, he works very similar to how our sphere that we were working with works as well. But this guy has been rigged. So rather than having, geometry that I'm grabbing and moving in points like we did with our sphere, this guy has little bones that exist underneath his geometry or underneath his skin and clothes. And they say, hey, if you're part of his forearm and he grabs the elbow joint and he rotates it, we're going to rotate it like a real person would. You can think of this like the armatures of a puppet. If you've ever seen like those little string puppets like Pinocchio, this guy essentially has those, but instead of strings, he's got these little controllers that let me rotate him, hopefully like a person. So you can see for some of the larger parts of him, his whole body here, we can move this and basically all the things that you'd expect to move. His feet, not necessarily, because this foot is actually supposed to be on the ground. If I move it forward, that foot's on the ground. So one part of him, like his center of gravity or his hips, moves a lot of him, and you get all the way down to the kind of finer detail elements like his fingers. So if I wanted to curl his pinky a little bit more, I have to select those 3 pinky controls and then rotate them, and we get some nice curl out of his hand. If I wanted the whole hand to rotate, I would just select kind of those guys there, and we could, again, rotate these guys into a little bit more of a fit if we wanted to do that. So here, if I turn off those curves, because those curves are handy, but they're kind of distracting if you're actually looking at this guy do his run. All of this happening is really happening because I've done stuff in my graph editor. So if I were to bring up this graph editor, this is really what this guy is doing. I've got my translate X, which is his side-to-side motion. Now, as he runs, he's not running perfectly straight. He's running with a little bit of a diagonal to him and then leaps off here. So kind of the most side-to-side motion he ever gets is about here. And then he changes direction back up there. He's got translate Y. So you can see his translate Y is kind of low, close to the ground. And then as he starts to run up this wall, he gets to here, and you can see this translate Y starting to rise. Just like our ball was rising, he rises. Translate Z, he's covering a lot of ground early on, and then he gets to this wall, and this translate Y doesn't really rise anymore because he's not pushing through the wall. He runs up the wall. So the translate Z, sorry, I think I said Y here. Translate Z kind of comes to a stop as he pushes himself up these walls. And the way I like to think of this is just all the different parts of him, starting from the center of gravity, are all kind of working in concert together. So that's essentially how you build up a 3D animated scene, is starting really, really simple. Start, how is this moving through space? Not really worrying about too much else. Oh, so that was really, really long. But I just wanted to give you guys a little taste of what the actual kind of day-to-day of a 3D animator is. So a 3D animator is going to be working in Maya with these puppets, doing whatever is necessary for the shot to happen. So maybe you would get a brief from a director saying, hey, I really want this really sad character here, you know, looming over his shoulders, everything's really, really dejected. So you would just pose your puppet in that way and give them some life as they're sitting there. Cool. So that's 3D animation. I wanted to open up the floor a little bit for some questions. If you guys have some about whether it's studios I've worked at, people I've worked with, some of the fun projects. If you've got a question about like how to get a job, what separates KPU from other schools, all those sort of things are totally, floor is 100% open if you've got something that you want to ask.
I got something.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I am one of the term 6 graduating this semester, and in the 3D animation course. And I sadly couldn't meet you during this course, but I was wondering, as someone who's been working in this industry for a long time, how do you feel about the current industry state with like, do you think it's, would you, I know I've heard this say like it's flows in and out getting hiring and stuff, but do you know like a way that, other than just like putting resumes out there, is there a way to like get noticed by these companies without, that isn't just putting your demo reel and resume in, or is that just the end all be all?
So I'll start with the state of the industry. Right now, it is being affected by the writer's strike. That said, the writer's strike and the voice actor strike doesn't affect the television for 3D animation industry quite as much as you'd expect. A lot of those voice actors actually can continue recording for non-feature film shows. So a lot of that stuff is actually picking up over the next couple of months. That said, it is not the nicest time in the industry. There are a lot of layoffs at companies, but what is also happening, and you see this with any sort of delay or strike, this happened with COVID as well. Whenever there is a little bit of a delay, there's a backlog of projects happen. As soon as it ends, there's a deluge of work because everyone wants to create their show, their whatever that's been kind of postponed. So it's kind of the thing that right now is a good time to be in school. It's going to be dicey probably well into like October. Unfortunately, that's not to say that there aren't people hiring, but it is just going to be a trickier time. Once you get a job, once it opens back up, it's going to be the same as it kind of always has. But yeah, right now, a little dicey, probably will be for a couple months until this writer's strike starts to wrap up. That said, just because it is like a harder time to find a job doesn't mean it's possible by any means. Obviously, demo reels are 90% of the jobs that are going to happen, but you usually don't end up getting your first job just because you kind of cold called a studio. Someone in your class might, but if you work at a 3D animation studio or a VFX studio, these people don't know any students. So if they're hiring juniors, they say, hey, we just hired a junior. And they ask that person, do you know any other juniors? And they'll say, oh yeah, I know 7 people in my class who want to be modelers or animators. So most of the time, your job doesn't really come from like sending in a reel and a resume. It comes from someone recommending you, and then you send in your reel and your resume. Because having a recommendation makes you so much more viable, because they know not only is this person good because we've seen their resume, but we know they're a nice person to work with because the person that we like working with, who've already hired, recommends them. So the big thing that I would suggest is to get along really well with your classmates, because as far as my career goes, almost all of the jobs I've ever gotten have been recommendations. And I'd say about half of them have been from people who were in my class when I was in school. So really get along well with the people, or at least a couple of them. It doesn't have to be everyone in your class, but get along well with a couple of the people in your class. And then keep in mind who you want to work with one day, because chances are, if you are that first person to get the job at a studio and they ask you, hey, do you have anyone else you'd recommend? You want to have like, oh yeah, totally. These 5 people are great. Are you guys hiring a rigger? Because we have a rigger who's fantastic. And they'll go, oh, actually, totally. So a lot of it is just kind of, I hate to use the word networking because that makes it sound so like weird and corporate, but it is just knowing people that are fun to work with, and they will kind of drag you along with them. And then the next job you have, when you've actually got some industry experience, you'll return the favor and then drag them along to a new studio that's doing even cooler stuff. And that's just kind of how it goes. So yeah, keeping in touch with people, maybe head to the animation meetups. If you go on, I think, Instagram and Facebook, there's a Vancouver animation meetup that happens. I think the last one was last week, but it's a great place to go. Talk to people, see who's hiring, because there's always somebody who's hiring. Meet some people in the industry, add them on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's a great place to go. Great place to learn some stuff.
Oh, I have a question, Andrew.
Totally.
So for the animation meetings, like anyone can go, because I read that it's only for people that are working in the industry.
They say that, but they're
Okay.
it's because they don't want like 1,000 students to show up, and it's a, you know, they want it to feel like more of an industry thing, but it's fine.
Where
So
are
you
these
can, like-
meetings? I've never
They
been
are.
invited.
Oh, what?
There's a Facebook. There's a
It's on
Facebook
Facebook.
and
Oh, I'm off Facebook.
Oh,
That
that would
makes
be
sense.
why.
Yeah.
It's also on Instagram, but you're probably off that as well.
Yeah.
I think they're at the Pint, and there's another one that's smaller. That I haven't been to. I'd have to like. There's like they also post in the same group. There's just 2 meetups per month that have just kind of recently started in the last 3 or 4 months. So just because they say no students, it's not a huge deal.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
good to know.
Mhm.
Andrew, I have a question.
Yeah, Diego.
Hello, by the way. I hope you're
Hello.
doing well.
Yeah, great. How are you?
I've got a student in here, Henry's hiding from Foundation.
Henry.
Hey, Henry. And I think Henry wants to do animation, but
Ooh.
can you speak to, I don't know if Henry was able to join earlier, but can you talk to what an animator, I know you spoke mostly about that, but what can you speak to your personal side of how does it go working on the industry as an animator? Or maybe Henry has a more directed question.
Yeah, if you've got something, because I can talk for hours about it, but let's hit maybe your direct question if you've got one.
I have like a more personal general question. It's like, what do you like most being an animator, and what do you hate most being an animator?
That's a good one. Yeah. Okay. What do I hate most? I wouldn't say hate, but like the hardest part of about being a 3D animator is definitely if you want to work on the coolest stuff, you have to be putting in the big hours. Where I work now, Weta is just standard 50 hours. You get paid for the overtime hours, which is nice, over 40, but it's a lot of work. And it's definitely something that is up to you. Like, you don't have to work 50 hours a week if you don't want to. That's depends on the studio that you want to work at. If you want to work on Avatar, yeah, 50 hours a week. If you don't want to work on Avatar, if you want to work on something else, something that has a little bit more time, a little bit just kind of softer on the deadlines, you totally can. It's a really flexible industry. So if you don't want to be doing those hours, you don't have to. You can pick a different studio and you can work on cool stuff. It's not Avatar. So the hours are probably my least favorite thing. The thing that I really like is probably getting to work with really, really talented people, because I, on my own, even if you gave me 100 years, I'm not going to make anything that looks as good as the projects that I've been able to work on, because there's like hundreds of people who are the best at the best of what they do in the world, all working together, all on one project. And even if it's, you know, one of the last movies I worked on was Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. Even if it's a dumb project, it's still really, really fun. Like, it's still really cool watching this come together, watching really talented people put in all of the like little techniques and little skills that they've developed over decades and decades of doing this, and churning out this like really incredible looking thing that comes together really, really fast. And you're like, dang, that looks so cool. So I think it's a combination of the people you're working with and working with really skilled people, really fun people. So yeah, it's just kind of this mix of the people, the project, everything coming together to just be this really interesting, challenging, exciting industry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
cheers.
have another question. It's like, is the work like different between the workflow different between the character animation and the creature animation in the visual effect?
Yes, I would say it is different. Like it is honing slightly different skills. They're related. It's not like, you know, if you're the world's greatest creature animator, you're not going to be the world's worst character animator, because a lot of those skills cross over. But the first time you do one after doing something else for a really long time, it can be a little dicey. It's just kind of like, hey, you're the world's greatest skateboarder, now ride a bike. They're not that dissimilar. You still need good balance. You still all of these things, but stopping is different. And you know, there are just little tiny things that are going to throw you off. But the best animators that I know are good at whatever they do. So if they worked in games on cycles, they'd be the best. And if they worked in visual effects on creatures, they'd still be the best. Because again, those 12 principles really come into play. If you're a good animator on something, you're going to be good at something else. You might not be, you know, something that you like, maybe you don't enjoy facial animation all that much. You'd rather do creature, you know, fighting each other and stuff. You'd still be good at the facial side, but maybe just because you enjoy creatures more, you'll be even better at that just because you'll put in more work.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Nice.
Andrew, what
Yeah.
would be the thing that you wish you had known when you were just getting started?
I wish I hadn't worried as much about not being able to draw very well, because it's nice, it's handy, but it's not the end of the world, especially if you're working in 3D animation. I guess since you guys are in school, it's not as big. I wish I hadn't worried about like learning math as much. It's not important at all. And I wish I'd spent more time like just life drawing, because that's so important. Yeah, I wish I'd, you know, I was just really nervous the whole time, because I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna get my first job? It's super scary. And it is super scary. It's the hardest thing you will ever have to do, bar none, is get your first job. The second one is so easy compared to the first one. The second one, you just walk into an interview and they're like, oh, cool. Hey, yeah, sweet. You seem nice. Have a job. The first one is gut wrenching. Takes a lot longer than you'd expect. It's pain, it's scary. Yeah, first one sucks, but the second one's so much easier. So yeah, just keep working at it. It's the crazy thing is the people that are like, even I get kind of starstruck when I see someone or meet someone in a meeting and they're like, oh yeah, my name's this. And you look at them up on IMDb and you realize that they've worked on like every single Spider-Man movie as an animation supervisor since 2001. And you're like, oh my God. But they're just people. They're just people with jobs. They're generally really nice people. So it's not as scary an industry as you kind of think looking from the outside in. It's just people working together, making cool stuff. So I really enjoy it. I really find it fun. Definitely wouldn't want to do something else. Yeah, it's just a matter of kind of honing your skills to the point where you're an asset to those teams. And as soon as you are, it's easy.
Thank you for that.
Cheers.
That's awesome.
Any other questions?
None for me. For me, this was very much just looking back at where I started and seeing what I have to. I came from, I guess, because as I said, I'm term 6, so
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, hopefully I can get a good as demo as yours in the future.
So my school demo reel was not great, so don't worry about it. I honestly,
it was great. What are you talking about?
The industry has gotten a lot tougher these days. I will.
Yeah, but with context, you know.
I think the students that are coming out now are also significantly better than like I was when I was a student. So the whole like quality bar of both students and what studios expect from students has all kind of risen a little bit from 10 years ago. And also just the the quality of work just across the whole industry is so much better. If you look at like TV animation now, it's awesome. And if you look at feature animation from 15 years ago, it's less awesome. So it's been a whole thing. I do want to really quickly, you've probably already gotten this from somebody, but I'm just going to paste this into the chat. This is a Google Doc with all of the kind of jobs in the industry. So if you are looking kind of at, even though you haven't graduated yet, kind of looking at what's kind of out there, this is a great place to start. What I would suggest doing, let me just pull this off and we can put this for a second, is I would share screen here. Like I always just sort this by Z to A, because Vancouver's at the top then. And you can just kind of like, even now, we say that like, oh, this is a super slow time for the industry. Super slow time for the industry. This is everything posted this month. Like it does go back, you know, once we get into Spain and whatnot, but like there's so many jobs still happening. So you can see whatever Starborn is, I have no idea what they are. Animal Logic's hiring right now. Sony is hiring right now. A lot of stuff from Atomic, ILM, EA, some more Sony stuff, something from Stellar, like Animal Logic's hiring, Icon's always hiring. Yeah, there's lots of jobs out there. It's tough because there's more people looking for them because fewer people have been picked up. So what used to be just kind of the whole graduating class would get swept up and move along, whole graduation class would get swept up, move along, isn't happening. They're picking and choosing. So you might be still competing with people who graduated a couple terms ago, unfortunately, but there's still a lot of jobs. Like WildBrain is hiring tons of people right now. 3D animators, pipeline TDs, layout supervisors, whatever. So just keep an eye on this Google Doc. And if you see something that kind of piques your interest, my suggestion is go on to LinkedIn, find the company, and then find someone who was just hired there in that role. So if you're looking to work as a junior animator at Icon, find a junior animator at Icon and look up their reel, because you know that that person was good enough to get hired at Icon. So just kind of make a better version of their reel. Boom. Yeah. Do the same thing for like, whether it's ILM, whatever, Pixar, just search out who they hired recently as a junior and just do a better version of that reel. Use that. Cool. Alrighty. Any other questions before we wrap up? No? Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for coming out. I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening. And yeah, I'll probably see you guys around. All right.
Hopefully I get to maybe see you one day. Yeah, because I sadly haven't got a class with you. So I'm like, maybe one day we can meet up.
Hopefully, yeah. I think there's only a couple 3D classes I haven't ended up
Yeah, because we were the ones that were just from Langara, so that's kind of why we were the literal last transfer class. So that's why.
Yeah, because Andrew used to teach in Langara as well. You just like you probably didn't get the luck one.
Yeah, it was literally like the transition period. So
there was one term where I was like, this seems like it's going to be a nightmare, and didn't teach it.
That I think that was literally the last term. We were the last term at Langara, so that's kind of why.
That's a shame.
Oh, it's all good. Diego taught me a lot as well.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah.
You should poke Andrew. There's lots that Andrew can teach you for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have our showcase coming up in 2 weeks. So if you both would come, that would be magnificent. So yeah.
They're on Saturdays now, right? That's actually kind of doable. Awesome.
Yeah. It should be August the 19th. So if you want to see the latest term showcase, you can see what our animes are done.
Yeah, if I'm available, I'll show up. I just don't know my schedule yet, but if I can make it, I'll be there.
Totally fine. Well, if anything, I might just post my work on here somewhere. Just be like, look at my stuff. But yeah, no, it was nice meeting you.
Awesome. Yeah, nice to meet you too. And good luck, both of you. Hopefully, Henry, I'll see you if you decide to move on into the 3D animation program. I'll definitely, I teach usually term 2 right now. And then if you're in VFX, I actually teach term 1 3D animation for them. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you there. But yeah, have a great evening, guys, and yeah, see you around.
Take care, Andrew. Good
Right.
to see
Bye,
you.
guys.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.